Good afternoon, everyone. At this time, I will call to order the October 25th Diversion Authority Land Management Committee meeting. Roll call, please. Here.
Mayor Peterson.
Here.
Mr. Redlinger. Mr. Campbell.
Here.
Mr. Borboom.
Here.
Mr. Hendrickson.
Here.
Mr. Olson.
Here.
Mr. Breitling.
Here.
Ms. Maggio.
Present.
Ms. Preston. Mr. Zimmerman.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Thank you. You have before you, or at least they were emailed to you, the minutes of the September 27th, 2023 meeting. Are there any corrections or additions or motion to approve?
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. And item number 3, the approval of the order of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion.
Is there a second? Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Item number 4, BNSF Railway and CHS Elevator Excess Land. Ms. Schmidt.
I'm not good with the mouse like Peggy is, so I apologize. So I hope all of you had time to kind of look through the packet, which was sent out to you last week to review the memo that was included in here, starting on page 2 of your packet. Really, this conversation has been ongoing for several months now. We've talked about it at the planning committee, and I know that we've been having some internal conversations about what we're going to do with the rail corridor and the Horace elevator site that was purchased several months ago by both the MFDA and the Cass County Joint Water Resource District. We went through and completed an analysis of what the expenses are associated with the elevator site and the rail corridor. We do have some that are annual expenses, so you can see just the maintenance, mowing, and weeding. We also have staff time that's included in this, utilities, and the estimated annual taxes and special assessments on that property. There are several one-time expenses that are associated with this property. The removal of the ballast will be required if it does not become a trail corridor. That's sitting at about $35,000. And if so chosen, we could also demo the grain elevator that is currently on that site, estimated to range between $150,000 and $400,000. And then, of course, there's the rail corridor site that's highlighted blue at the end of this memo that we will need to purchase for $352,000 if Horace elects to not exercise that option. So going through this then, some of the conversations that have occurred is the potential for Horace to acquire this property. The MFDA did purchase the price of the CHS elevator for a little over $3 million. That was not appraised value, but it was agreed upon between the MFDA and the CHS to replace the elevator storage and capacity and build that capacity at another site. The purchase of the elevator was a condition by CHS to abandon that rail line, which was facilitated by the abandonment of the rail line by the Red River Valley Western. I'm saying that all wrong. The purchase price of the associated rail line and associated land, excluding the elevator, was just about $1.1 million. So you're looking at $4.1 million for just over 8 acres of property. This purchase price was based on the appraised value and per BNSF requirements, which includes a 15% railroad corridor enhancement factor. So conversations that have occurred with the City of Horace is our understanding is that their 2045 comprehensive plan identifies the city's desire to construct a public trail along this rail corridor. It does play a critical role in connecting the most heavily programmed areas of the park system. In 2023, the City of Horace did approve moving forward with the development of a conditional agreement with the MFDA and Cass County Joint if the City of Horace purchased its priority portion of the rail corridor. Then the MFDA and Cass County Joint would deed the CHS rail elevator and associated rail corridor to the City of Horace for $2. The planning committee did meet several weeks ago. We did have a lengthy conversation about this option. At that time, the planning committee did ask that we continue forward on a path of an agreement with Horace that would allow for the sale of the property to them for that $2. That then would, if they continue to use it for public use, they could continue to have it for $2. If they ever sold it for development, then we would split the profits 50-50. In order to do that, this committee would have to authorize making an exception to our excess lands policy. Per the policy, the land that is no longer needed and not expected to be needed in future of the project and declared excess by the executive director may be available for sale, lease, or exchange in accordance with the policy. So additionally, when a member proposes to authority to sell excess land, member entities should observe the following guiding principles stating in the policy 1.5.1, which is refrain from selling land at less than market value. Of course, selling it for $2 and we paid $4.1 million, knowing that that was an inflated price by BNSF and CHS, we would need to make an exception to that because we paid the 4.1 and we'd be selling it for the $2 to Horace. I did go through an exercise with the assistance of some other team members to estimate the current land value of this based off of an $8 per square foot for the 3.5 acres of the elevator property. You're looking at a little over $1.2 million. If you think it's worth a little bit more, so you say $12 per square foot, you're looking at about $1.8 million. And again, estimated costs of $150,000 all the way up to $400,000. So if you did your worst case scenario, that's worth $8 per square foot. You're looking at $1.2 million. If you think it's going to cost $400,000 to demo that structure, you're looking at a value of about $800,000. So that would be what this committee would be approving an exception to the excess lands policy. Again, estimated price of just the elevator site, not the rail corridor, would be $800,000 at worst case scenario, and again for exchange for the $2. But again, that agreement allows for any sale of that property for development to shift that so that there'd be a 50-50 profit share there. So the other thing that we would need to discuss today is a second exception that would need to occur is that policy does require that all properties be made available in a preferential order. The first one would be to our stakeholder and our member entities. This would be kind of leapfrogging over all of the member entities and allowing the city of Horace to purchase this prior to giving the opportunity for any of our member entities, any of the neighboring property owners, the opportunity to purchase this property at market value. So in conversations with our chairwoman, another option was developed. Our current excess lands policy, section 4.2 of the policy, does allow for the city of Fargo and the city of Moorhead to list excess lands with a licensed real estate agent or through a public RFP process. A proposal would be that we could create an exception to that section 4.2 that would allow for us to add this property into that section of the policy. Are there any questions so far? I know there's a lot that we're going over. And again, this is the map. So this is the property that was necessary to purchase for the development of the channel. It also allowed us to not have to rebuild a rail bridge that I believe is estimated to cost us approximately $15 million. So we did save a significant amount of funds by moving forward, guaranteeing BNSF that we will purchase all of this rail corridor that is in orange and blue if the neighboring property owners do not purchase it. What we know to date is this area right here that I'm circling with my cursor, that property owner is exercising their option to purchase that, and then these two property owners right here are exercising their option to purchase. So what is in question here is this blue corridor right here, and then of course the green is what Cass County Joint owns, and the yellow is what the MFDA owns. So it's really a three-party agreement between the City of Horace, the Cass County Joint Water Resource District, and the Metro Flood Diversion Authority. Any questions?
I have a question on the orange sections. The purchase price from those adjacent landowners, were they offered an agreement similar in percentage to what this is?
Commissioner Mojo, I know right now what they're doing is they're working directly with BNSF. It's not with the MFDA or the Cass County Joint Water Resource District. So they're having to pay market value for that, and that's based off an appraisal that BNSF completed. And so we've looked at those numbers. I've looked at just one of those property owners' numbers, and it's in line with what we would recommend that we would sell this rail corridor for if we are to acquire that property. So it wasn't for $2, but I don't know if it's for, the high end of the development property. So again, this orange area and or this blue area will have a different market value than this yellow area, because this yellow area and this kind of green portion, like this triangle, that's really considered, an area that could be developed. The rail corridor does have some restrictions to it. There can be some environmental hazards, and there'll be restrictions on future development of that area. So really it'd be an expansion of the property line for the neighboring property owners, not something that you'd ever be able to build a home on, for example.
Any other questions? I guess I would just have a comment. I don't have to remind this group of all the hard work and time we all put in, along with staff, on putting together this policy. So before we stray from it, I think we need to be really, really cautious about it. Cass County just committed to follow this policy, and I believe we're spending $140,000 on land that was previously acquired by the project for right away. I'm guessing that Cass County might be interested in this property as well, if we're going to be selling it for $1. It certainly isn't in our budget for the almost $2 million that it's probably worth. I look at, as a DA board member, yes, we did purchase this land for an inflated amount of money. There's no question about it. And we did save it. I mean, it was a net savings in the end to make, so we didn't have to purchase a bridge. So that was great, but we weren't anticipating on having to buy a bridge either. So we needed the cash, whatever we could get back, and that was the idea when we made this purchase, is we weren't going to hang on to it, that we would be getting that cash back at some point. So I think that it's not $20,000. It's going to be close to $2 million. It's in prime development area, and I, for the life of me, don't know why we would be going forward with this. I think that there are ways for the city of Horace to accomplish what they'd like to through zoning and perhaps tax incentives, whatever it might be. And I think rather than putting it out there as for an auction, that listing it with a realtor that's experienced in this sort of thing would be would give an opportunity to have a little more control, quite a bit more control, on who purchases this land, what the price is going to be, what the conditions are going to be, who your neighbors are going to be, just like you do in any community. I hear over and over and over again that I want the Oxbow deal. And I'll tell you what, this would be a can of worms, because I bet Kindred would like this deal too, and so would Castleton, and maybe even Buffalo. And I mean, this is a big county, and all of these taxpayers paid for that railway corridor. All of them did. And so, and they're paying for their own community taxes, their own things that they want to have developed there. The pushback that I would get from this would be enormous. Commissioner Campbell.
Yeah, thank you. When we had this discussion at our planning committee meeting,
there were several factors that were brought up, and one of them would be the need to make an exception to our policy. When we did this policy, I don't think any of us had the wisdom of Solomon to know what all would be future things that might come up that might need some sort of amendment. It seems to me that because this property is located within Horace, that local entity should have some say in it. And when we brought up the idea of, okay, well, we'll do the $2 deal, that puts then, if they decide to do something else with it, they have to cover the cost of demolition, right? Because we would turn that over to them. That would be their responsibility if that's the path chosen. If they elect to do something other than that, and they want to then market that thing for anything other than for public use, then we would get into a cost share. Most of our excess lands issues have not been within municipalities. Most of our excess lands issues have been in rural areas where we've maybe purchased more land than we needed for the footprint of this project. If we were to, when we look at the in-town levies, for example, that are in Moorhead, and the costs associated with acquiring the lands needed to do those things. In the future, if some of those lands are determined to be excess lands, I would imagine the city of Fargo or the city of Moorhead is going to maybe want to have a say in what's going to be done with those properties, with that excess property. I'm sitting here as trying to be independent on this thing, understanding Horace's position on this. It's within their city limits. And it seems to me that and I agree, and it was my understanding that our determined value on this thing for the area that we're talking about was $1.2 million. I think that was what was talked about at the Planning Commission meeting, was the value of that, or what we paid for that particular parcel. Now I see it's more than that, but.
Correct.
Because when I asked the question, what did we pay for it at the Planning Committee meeting, it was $1.2 million.
So for the elevator structure and the underlying land, we paid approximately $3 million. And then for the rail corridor, so the green strip, we paid a separate $1.1 million.
Okay.
So in totality, we paid the $4.1 million for all of it together.
Yeah.
I know we've had conversations about breaking the elevator portion of the land separate from the rail corridor, because that's the area that's the most development.
But, and again, going back to, what came out of the Planning Commission, we talked about that if we do this deal and if Horace elects to keep it all as is and it's for public use, then so be it. But if they determine to go to the idea that it's going to be demolished, that becomes their financial responsibility and risk rather than the diversion authorities. And then whatever they do with it after the fact, when they market it, then that's when we came in and we said, well, we think there needs to be a share in that revenue. And that basically was the conversation that we had. And I thought that was perfectly fair. Right now there's an estimate of what, 150 to 400 to demolish that. Good luck with that one.
Thank you, Commissioner. I will say that, it's still in excess of $1 million.
Mary, your microphone's off.
Thank you. It's still in excess of $1 million. It's something. And I think that, we've got Finance Committee coming up next. I don't know, do they have an extra $1 million to just donate to the city of Horace? I wouldn't vote for that. I do think, I understand what you're saying, Commissioner Campbell, the desire of Horace to have some control in this, and they certainly would with their zoning, and I would have no objection to them being involved in in learning about who would be interested in purchasing it.
Can I ask a question
Yes,
quick?
please.
So earlier you said that you anticipate 3.5 acres available to be resold. Is that correct?
I'm going to scroll down to the map. So the 3.5 acres, I'm going to enlarge this just a little bit. The 3.5 acres is this triangle right here. And then if you include all of this rail corridor down here, that would bump it up a little over 8 acres. And so the development, what I would consider the area that could be further developed would be this triangle area portion here. And then this rail corridor down here is a little bit more challenging to develop just because the restrictions that are placed on the property.
Yeah.
Right.
So can you go to page 19, I believe it is, or the one that shows a map of the Diversion Authority purchased area? So one question I have, it appears like this land may be unplatted land. I'm not sure if Mayor Pearson can comment on that. Oh, sorry, go back up a couple to the yellow.
Are you talking about this
It
one
appears
right
like
there?
it's unplatted. It looks like that land goes all the way to the section line. And if that 3.5 acres incorporates that, just knowing on the Fargo side, we would require that to become platted land, which then we would require some dedicated right-of-way at that point, which would reduce that amount of land that would be available to be developed, which may impact how much that purchase price could be. If you counted 3.5 acres and maybe an acre of that or something that has to be dedicated right away, then really the only developable land is 2 to 2.5 acres or something, which of course would impact that purchase price.
And I can't speak to the right of way and how much would be taken from that. But when we considered the 3.5 acres, we took this center avenue right here and we pulled this all the way back because we own this area here. And so we kind of pulled this triangle back to here. And then we pulled it all the way up here because it kind of crosses Wall Avenue over here. It's not showing on this map. And so it's a little bit inclusive of both this area, because this is the MFDA property outlined in yellow, and then Cass County Joint actually owns this rail corridor, which is why it's a 3-way agreement. I know Joel can go over the agreement if we want him to, but that's why it would be a 3-way agreement. The MFDA could just sell off this portion, this triangle. I don't have the exact acreages off the top of my head because we could kind of, when we looked at this, severed it right here, pulled this all the way up across, and it goes across Wall and then back down like this. And so we can dice this up kind of however, it would be determined to do that, but just kind of based off the area that would be available to develop, we felt like this is probably the best area that we could kind of sever it. And then again, as you kind of go south, you see kind of these 2 rail corridors. And then this is kind of where you get over into this area is just the rail corridor. So here you can see it a little bit better. You would kind of go from this area and you go across the street to this triangle here.
Yeah, so I think the 3.5 acres is probably high, it appears, for what's developable. And I think that's, I guess, kind of my point is if you reduce what's actually developable, that's going to impact the purchase price. And when you start considering some of the other factors of the demolition cost for the structure, as well as the $358,000, I think it was, that Horace agreed to buy for the additional right-of-way, that maybe that metric of the difference is getting closer to being 0. Don't know that for certain without knowing what actual developable acreage is, though.
I can say the last information I got was the median land values in Horace that were developable are going for nearly $12 a square foot. So we've got old appraisals based on other information. We've never had a market analysis done. This is the fastest growing community in North Dakota. It's the middle of town. I assume that it would fetch top dollar. It's not worth nothing.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Moncho, excuse me.
That's all right. I can answer to that too. But I'm struggling with this proposal from someone who sits on a governing board. I totally understand that oftentimes governments have the means to deal with properties that have substantial issues on them better than maybe the general public. But what I keep going back to is our intense work that it took to create our policy. It's not a surprise that I've differed in opinions on a lot of issues on this board, but I'm really proud of how we came together to create a policy that treated people as fair and as flexible as possible. And Commissioner Charlene said the exact statement in which I did. This is the fastest growing city and community in all of North Dakota. And I have a hard time thinking that fair market or the private sector wouldn't eat this up at a value more than $2. I totally understand that it would make sense for maybe Horace to do that, but unless we're going to start negotiating with farmland excess values for $2 an acre, I can't support this. And I'm frustrated because I agree exactly with what Commissioner Sherling said at the beginning. I thought we would have learned at the beginning when we were paying exorbitant prices for properties that maybe were more than they were valued before. And we've all had those criticisms on the Oxbow deals for a long, long time, but this would blow that out of the water. Respectfully, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Oh, Mr. Shockley, please join us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There was just a question raised that I thought I could jump up and answer. This is currently meets and bounds with an auditor's lot. So if it were to be redeveloped, you'd likely need to go through the platting process as it goes to the center line of the road, which is currently subject to existing rights of way. So just like when you have a city, you'd have to go through the platting process. And so whatever you're assigning the value to, you're going to lose some of the square footage to your rights of way, your setbacks from the city, et cetera. And I'm not taking a side one way or another. I just want to make sure you have the facts correct. Thank you.
And so that parcel 1 and 2 is 0.6 acres, and then the remaining acreage that we were including back here would incorporate that other 3 acres.
And as long as we've got Mr. Shockley here, I have a question for you. So if we were to make a motion to follow the excess lands policy as written, would we need to amend that in any way to have it, to give direction to our executive director to list it with a realtor rather than public auction?
So I'll answer each. I think there's 2 questions there. First of all, if you wanted to go forward with this offer, you'd have to make a motion to make an exception to the policy. And so that would be one option. If you decide that you do not want to take this offer and you just want the excess lands policy to move forward with public auction, you just say, no, we're not going to request this offer. The third one would be if you want to direct the executive director to follow the excess lands policy with the intent of listing, instead of going through a public sale, listing it with a real estate agent, then you'd need that. That's a third possible motion. So you have really three different options. I'm sure there's other options too, but.
And Chairwoman, I believe that would be creating an exception to that section 4.2 of the existing policy, where you would allow us to move forward with listing this with a realtor or through the RFP process versus us going to a public auction.
Thank you. Commissioner Breitling.
My concern is more fundamental. My understanding, and if I'm mistaken, John can correct me, but underlying this project is a special assessment district that would be subject to assessments if our funds do not have enough in the bank to take care of a project. I believe that's correct. Now, I don't know what that is at this point, But I do know that there are people whose opinions that I admire a great deal who tell me that it's going to be nip and tuck, and we may have to do this. Now, if we're going to assess others for a cost that we could retrieve here, that's a problem for me. But I understand that that's potentially a problem, that we may have to make special assessments under that special assessment or that district that was established. I think I'm correct in my analysis of that.
Please, Mr. Shockley.
Thank you,
address
Madam
it.
Chair. That is generally correct. If there is a shortfall in sales tax revenue, we would have to fall on the assessment district through the Cass County Joint Board for essentially the deficiency between the amount of sales tax that's produced versus the debt service payment. Right now, we're not projecting that to happen, but as you've always heard me on different meetings, we have to closely watch the budget to make sure that we can continue to provide those assurances to the taxpayers that we're doing everything that we can to make sure that does not happen.
Would there be any support for deferring any action until we have a better understanding of where our budget's going to be a year or two from now?
I think it would probably be closer to the end of construction. So you'd probably be looking at 2027 before we really had a firm handle on where the budget was. Majority of our costs are going to be paid out towards the end of construction because of the contracting method that we chose with the public-private partnership. So it isn't until whole components of the project are completed before we make financial transactions. But we certainly would have a better idea of where we're coming in as we get closer to that 2027 date.
I would support the deferring of the request until we have a solid understanding of where we are with our overall budget.
I'll just note on, any deferment would require the authority to purchase the remaining right-of-way at $350,000 that the city of Horace was committing to purchase as a part of this deal. And then, of course, the ongoing maintenance costs. We do have concerns with that structure. There has been trespassers out there and those sorts of things. So, I mean, from my recommendation would be to dispose of it sooner than later, but certainly understanding your perspective on the budget as well, Commissioner Breitling. We could hold on to it for a few years until we have better clarity on that. But it is somewhat of a liability as well for the authority to hold on to the structure from a safety and security standpoint.
If the values of the land continue to rise, it would be to our benefit.
It could be, yes.
Right.
Could be.
So don't we have to, doesn't BNSF's policy, though, require them to offer it now to the adjacent landowner, portions of that?
That's correct. So the orange and the blue will be offered to adjacent landowners. And if there are no, there's a few that Ms. Smith knows would like to purchase it. Any remaining left at the end would be the authority's responsibility to purchase.
And there's no reason for us to stand in the way of that?
That's a policy discussion. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Mayor.
So I appreciate the discussion we're having here this afternoon, so I hear different opinions on this. One of the things that as the representative of Horace here, I kind of wanted to point out a couple of things. One was that the elevators that we have in town are kind of historical, obviously. There's been a lot of comments in town about if we can preserve them, and that's partly, well, I'd say mostly that's where this all came from, is we want to try and see if we can preserve those elevators. The intent was never to tear them down. It was to see if we could, if they were still viable enough to turn it to some other type of recreational thing, or to turn them into, there's been many conversations of a microbrewery or some coffee shop or something like that, turn it into something that would be historical for the city to have, because it is an icon of the city. It's been around for a long time. So that was where these conversations started. And Joel, you and I had these conversations way back when you realized about the bridge, as we called it, the bridge to nowhere, because the elevators were not being used, with any great capacity other than just for storage. So that's why when, we kind of worked with the diversion to get CHS involved in this, of talking with you guys and things like that, to try and help you guys save some money on this whole thing. With the, anticipation that when this got concluded, that we would be able to get a hold of the elevators and be able to do something, hopefully to preserve them. Now, again, we haven't had a structural engineer go through them, totally to see how viable this is, but that's why we thought, well, we get them and we can go through that process and see. But that is what our plan is to try and, unless we're told otherwise that those things cannot be used, it was to see if we can convert them into some type of a recreational component, or at least some avenue that way, so that it can bring a value to the city as far as historical presence. So that's kind of where that was. You guys talk about your policy, and I can appreciate that a little bit. We spent an awful lot of time going through a special assessment policy. We had consultants come in and help us with it. We spent a tremendous amount of time on that policy, and we have already had some exceptions that have come because of it. Just there's different things that happen that you don't foresee, just like you mentioned. I wish I had the gift of 5 to 10 years on everything, but I don't. Right. So we've had to make exceptions to that. Just like any other policy or procedure that we all get involved in, there will always be exceptions to it. So I'll just pass that along. But anyway, I appreciate you guys taking this up and having conversation about it. And like I said, we would sure like to try and do something with those elevators to try and preserve that as history for our town. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, I think that there's a path forward for this, that Horace could certainly be involved in those conversations. If, we're listing it with a realtor, those visions could be shared, and certainly shared with any potential buyers that realtor might be approached by. So I do think that there's a way forward with this, but we have a good policy here, and to gift millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars away is bad policy, and I just will not support that. Does anyone else have any more comments, or is there a motion?
If I can just ask a question. So this same issue was vetted out through our planning committee, and there was a motion made and seconded and passed unanimously to move forward. And so now we have another committee who's on a different, so what, we have conflicting, potentially conflicting issues between two committees. So how do we handle that?
Well, I think we're looking at an exception to the policy, and that's what we're looking at. And some of the financial things that have been brought up, as a DA board member, I certainly have that concern, but the Finance Committee can go to that. I really don't know why the Planning Commission or committee was brought into this, quite frankly. But I will let Mr. Shockley address that. Thank you.
Madam Chair, great question, Commissioner Campbell. When there's two conflicting recommendations from committees, it's going to be ultimately up to the diversion board to make the decision. You take into account the recommendations of each committee and have to make a decision which recommendation you want to go with.
I just want to add to Mr. Shockley, it will also be up to the Cass County Joint Water Resource District tomorrow, because they own a portion of the property that we're discussing today. So my intention will be, whatever the determination of the Lands Committee and the Finance Committee and the Planning Committee, they could all be 3 separate recommendations, will be parroted to the Cass County Joint Board tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. to make a determination And then again, whatever their determination will be added on to, kind of what is brought forward to the MFDA board for consideration tomorrow afternoon.
And again, I certainly understand the concept of the original investment that we had. Can we go back to that screen there? That right there.
Is someone?
So this was presented. And so the green area, if I'm so approximate price, that's the 1,232,000, right? And so is that for the
correct.
entire green section?
That is the green area for an average cost about $2 per square foot. And then you have the MFDA site here. And I might turn to Chris Backyard a little bit because he helped pull this one together. But yeah, the green area then, it does include all of that.
That green area also includes the green area on the channel as well.
This down here.
That's correct. That's included in the $1.2 million purchase.
And that's what we paid.
That's what we paid.
Okay. And so the area that we're talking about in regards to just the elevator area, is that the area right, the yellow and then all the green that goes north of that?
That's correct. So you'd kind of cut across right here. If you're familiar with the area, it's kind of where the Horace Fire Department is, that parking lot, and there's that road right there. So you kind of cut across that, and then you go, and that's Center Avenue, and then you go all across, and Wall is right in here. So it's a big triangle area in there.
So based on the 1.232 million that we paid for all of the green that's there, what proportion would that be on the green area we're talking about that's attached to the pie that deals with the elevator area?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I'm kind of staring at Chris because I can feel him calculating. We didn't actually.
I'm assuming if you're dealing with it, I'm sorry, but if the average of the total was $2.12, right?
Just for the green area.
For the per square foot.
Yep, just for that green area.
Because we paid.
That is correct.
Right. So if you were to take that same calculation and talk about just the area now that the elevator portion, that little V that we're talking about there, if we take just that portion and you were to multiply that acreage out times the $2.12, what do you get?
It'd be 3 acres.
And again, I'm trying to go based on our original investment on this thing.
131,000.
So, and again, what went through the planning commission was to accept Horace's idea that there would keep it for public use. First off, that was my understanding of it, that they wanted to keep it for public use. Okay, and then the demolition, if required, would then fall on to Horace. Okay, and so now that number is upwards from 100 to 400, which is more than the square footage price that we paid for that area involved just all by itself. And then going to what Commissioner Sherling and others have said, that the real value of that thing moving forward, if it's in this prime area, then we've said that, after the demolition costs are done, that Horace would then have to have paid for, that we would ask for a split in the revenues that would come from that. So it seems to me under that scenario that if it stays for the public good, I think that's some consideration that we should give to the local community, just like we would if it was in-town levies in Fargo or if it was in-town levies in Moorhead. Some of that local people should have a say in that. But where I think we're protecting ourselves in our investment in what we paid for it is saying that we're going to, after they've torn it all down, we still want, if this thing has a $5 million value down the road and they sell it for that, we want half of that $5 million. That was the discussion we had at the planning meeting that we had. So it seems to me, in my estimation, I think we were covering our investment in the process that we went about here.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Commissioner.
I don't even know what the Planning Commission is. I thought
Planning
we had a
Committee.
land.
If I called it a planning commission, I meant to say planning committee.
Right. It's curious to me that we're having such in-depth land-specific discussions at something that is other than the Lands Management Committee.
Thank you, Commissioner. The Planning Committee was recently, I want to say within the last 2 years, perhaps. Mr. Shockley's right here. He can explain it. And maybe you want to just clarify to us, John, what exactly the purpose of the Planning Committee is.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Sherling. The Planning Committee was established after a retreat and a long process of governance discussion with Jeff Schatz, who is advising the board on different governance, along with administrative procedures. And it was felt that it was a place where items that would be on the diversion board agenda would be talked about and kind of make sure they were vetted out before they got onto the agenda from what I would call a leadership standpoint, in that each of the member entities has a member on the planning committee, and the whole idea is to make it so that if things should be on the consent agenda, they would be on the consent agenda, or if there were major policy development items that needed to be undertaken, it was a way to help direct the executive director, staff, and consultants. For example, working on a draft operations and maintenance policy, those sorts of things. And that's why the planning committee was created, and also why members who may not be on the diversion authority board are not familiar with the terminology, because it's a relatively new committee, as Commissioner Sherling has indicated.
Thank you. Did that help?
Yes, thank you. I still don't know if it's necessarily circumvents what the Land Management Committee is supposed to do in this instance.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I just, to Commissioner Campbell's comments, my understanding, when we talked about some of the funds that we've utilized in the communities, those have been for flood protection. We're talking development here. And that's what that land is. And he's talking breweries and coffee shops, and there's no guarantee that we would ever get our money back, ever. And there's no reason to give half our money away. It's taxpayer dollars, and they belong with the project. We've said that from day one, that it's not for recreation. It's not for development. How many times have we said this is not for development? And we have a policy that we've all worked hard on, and I think that we should follow it.
Madam Chairman.
Can I just add some numbers Chris was able to pull real quickly as we were discussing? The approximate value of this triangle that we're discussing, so not the remaining corridor, was about $607,000 to purchase that, kind of based off the per square foot value.
And that includes the yellow?
That includes the yellow as well, yeah.
So we've had quite a bit of discussion on this. I would like to see a motion.
Madam Chairman.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Mongeau.
Hi, thank you. I find it a little tone deaf personally that in the last 2 weeks I've been asked as a board member in Clay County to make a motion for last written offers for people who saw nominal increases in those last written offers. And we're talking about a huge increase here in price versus what the purchase price back would be. So because of that, and because I believe in the markets, I would recommend from this board that we pursue offering this either through a realtor or through an auction for dispersal. Thank you.
So that's a motion?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there a second? Is there a second?
Roger seconds.
Thank you, Roger. Any further discussion? Bob?
Just to clarify, so that would require a deviation from the policy?
Yeah, let me answer that question for Mr. Zimmerman. That does, because currently only the properties kind of within the districts of the city of Moorhead and Fargo allow us to use a realtor. Otherwise, we need to go through the whole process and go to a public auction. So that section 4.2, let me scroll up really quick and shrink this back down. That section 4.2 is in your packet and kind of how it is currently stated. And so this is how it reads: boundaries and extraterritorial zoning jurisdictions of the city of Fargo and city of Moorhead by listing excess land with a licensed real estate agent or through a public RFP process. So because this one does not currently sit within the city of Fargo or the city of Moorhead, we're not allowed to do that. We would go through the excess lands policy and go to a public auction unless an exception was made today or recommended. And then that recommendation would go to the MFDA board for consideration tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Okay, there's been a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Shirley?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
No.
Mr. Campbell?
No.
Mr. Borboom?
No.
Mr. Hendrickson?
No.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
Mr. Breitling?
Yes.
Ms. Maggio?
Yes.
Ms. Preston?
Yes.
Mr. Zimmerman?
No.
We have 5 yea and 5 nay.
Okay, good job, people. So the motion doesn't pass, correct?
Correct.
Yes. So do we have any other motions?
I would like to move that we defer the request from the city of Horace until we have solid evidence that we're not going to run short of the income as opposed to the expenses for the project. Now, whether that's 1 or 2 or 2.5 years, whatever that gets to be, we can reconsider the request at that time.
You've heard the motion. Is there a second? Is there a second? Is there a second? Motion dies for lack of a second.
Could I make a motion to defer this to the next meeting and have the Diversion Authority staff look and see what is actually developable land here? I believe the 3.5 acres is larger than what's actually developable, so I'd like to know what is actually developable to get a better understanding of what that value of the land actually is.
So is that a motion to table?
Table, please, yes.
Second.
Okay.
If I may, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr.
Just
Paulson.
to add a little bit of information to that motion. BNSF is requiring the purchase of that blue right-of-way, I believe, within the month. And so if we defer this, the authority will have to purchase that, which would fundamentally change what's being proposed from Horace.
Well, we wouldn't have to purchase that.
It would be offered to adjacent property owners, and then we would have to purchase it.
Right. But first it goes to adjacent property owners.
That's correct.
Right. And there is some interest, perhaps? I don't know.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, okay. Well, the motion has been made and it's seconded. I believe there's no further discussion and it's just tabled till our next meeting, whenever that is, or until we get the answers that you're looking for. So, thank you, everyone. Great discussion. Commissioner Campbell, do you have something you wanted to add?
I think Robert's rules is slightly different than that.
Okay, well, please.
Well,
I could very well have it wrong.
No,
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry, but I think there has to be a motion or a vote on tabling.
See, I was thinking there wasn't a vote on tabling, but maybe
if we
Mr.
can ask
Shipley
John,
knows.
because I believe there's a motion, there needs to be a vote on whether it should be tabled or not.
Okay, we'll find out.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Generally, you need a motion on the table and then a motion to table the motion that's on the, or you need a motion that's being discussed and then a motion to table the motion that's under discussion. And a motion to table is non-debatable. So for example, the underlying motion might be a motion to approve a permit, a zoning permit. There's a first and a second, and then a board member on planning and zoning will say, I move to table it, you get a second, and then you vote to table.
Okay, so we don't have a motion anymore. We had a tied motion.
Madam Chair,
Yes. Commissioner
I would
Monjo.
make a motion. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would make a motion to recommend the diversion of authority that we follow through with our policy for excess land disposal.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I think that I would like to see us do exactly what was suggested by the table motion before it would get to the full board. I think we should have the additional information that can help everybody then make that determination.
Then you would want to make a motion to table the motion.
I move to table the motion.
Commissioner Campbell, you're on the diversion authority and you will negotiate it there.
Right.
This is a recommendation.
So thank you, Commissioner Monjo. So Commissioner Campbell, you're making a motion to table Commissioner Monjo's motion.
That's correct.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
Thank you. There is a second. Do we vote on this?
No, yes.
Okay. Now, roll call vote.
Mrs. Sherling?
I'm sorry, I did not hear you.
Mrs. Sherling?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Borboom?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
Mr. Breitling?
Yes.
Ms. Monjo?
No.
Ms. Preston? Yes. Mr. Zimmerman?
Yes.
We have 9 yea and 1 nay.
Thank you.
If I may just ask everyone's assistance in repeating all of these motions and where we ended up at the subsequent meeting and our meetings tomorrow, a little bit of grace when I get up there and fumble through this.
Very good. Item number 5, I believe we've basically gone through that. Is there any other business? Any other business? Our next meeting will be determined. Thank you all for joining us today. We are adjourned.